You're listening to The Murder in My Family, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including Missing Persons, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective,
and Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its host, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss the murder in your family on this podcast, please be sure to visit themurderinmyfamily.com for more information. This episode may contain unsettling material or subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Murder in My Family. I'm your host, Mike Morford.
In this episode, I'll be discussing the case of a young father who was beaten to death at a fair in front of his friends, and the case went unsolved. Decades later, his daughter is searching for answers and justice in the case.
We'll dive into this case after some quick housekeeping. Independent podcasts like this one depend on word of mouth to bring in new listeners. So if you find that you enjoy this show, please take a moment to rate and review it wherever you listen to your podcast. And be sure to introduce a friend to the show and invite them to listen. With your help, The Murder in My Family can continue to grow and reach a new audience. To learn more about the show or the cases we discuss, please visit themurderinmyfamily.com. You can also find us on Twitter with the handle @MurderMyFam or on Facebook at facebook.com/TMIMF podcast.
If you'd like to support The Murder in My Family and get VIP access to things like ad-free listening, early preview episodes, and bonus content of not only this show, but for every other podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Your support is greatly appreciated.
And thank you to all of the supporters that generously donate to help keep the show growing and improving. One last note. Please support any of the sponsors that you hear on The Murder in My Family, the way that those sponsors support the show. It's with our sponsor support that this show can go on and continue to provide a platform to share these stories with you in every episode. Thank you. And now on with the show.
Today's case is one that seems like it should have been solved shortly after it happened. Instead, Kristy Joyner, our guest today, is fighting for answers and justice in her father's murder, 38 years later. Sadly, Kristy has no memories of her father, Jimmy Townsend, because he was murdered when she was only 4 weeks old. James Allen Townsend Jr., or Jimmy as he was known to friends and family, was born on December 20th, 1971, to Rita Gail Townsend and James Townsend Sr. He lived in Monroe, Louisiana, about 100 miles east of Shreveport. Jimmy was an only child, and he attended Reiser Junior High. He was incredibly athletic and played multiple sports for his school, including baseball and football. He also enjoyed bowling, fishing, and hunting. Not long before his death, he had taken up boxing. It seemed that whatever Jimmy put his mind to, he could excel at. But as busy as Jimmy was, he wasn't immune to the struggles and temptations that teenagers face. Like many teenage boys in the 1980s, Jimmy experimented with marijuana, and he became sexually active. He got involved with a girl who was a few years older than him. Before they knew it, she was pregnant. Being a parent's hard work and full of challenges, and it's likely that this young couple with a baby on the way had no way of knowing what to expect or how they would deal with it. But they prepared as best as they could with the help of their families. And in the summer of 1985, they welcomed their daughter, Kristy Jane. But before Jimmy could really experience fatherhood for any length of time, his life would end. Jimmy was still a child himself at the time of his murder. He was just 13 years old, an 8th grader, on September 28, 1985, when he went to the Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi Fair that was held at the Monroe Civic Center in Monroe, Jimmy's hometown. Jimmy and two of his friends were on the east side of the Civic Center in a secluded and quiet spot where they had stepped away to smoke a joint together. and that's where they ended up having an argument or an altercation with another group of boys who outnumbered them. Jimmy was scrappy and, using his boxing knowledge, defended himself, hitting one of the boys that was attacking him. But the 3 boys were no match for the much larger group of about 7 boys, so they decided to run, heading in 3 different directions. The pursuing group focused on Jimmy and chased him down, and quickly caught up to him, beating him viciously. They pummeled him, and when he fell to the ground, they kicked and stomped him repeatedly. Fearing that they would be caught or identified, the group of attackers fled the scene. Jimmy's friends, meanwhile, had found help and brought them back to where Jimmy had been beaten, finding Jimmy partially hidden under a car. First responders tried to do CPR, and Jimmy was barely alive. He was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, he didn't survive. A medical exam at the hospital revealed that Jimmy was so badly beaten that his organs couldn't be donated. Jimmy's official cause of death was listed as multiple intracranial injuries. The injuries were similar to those seen in what is referred to as shaken baby syndrome. Jimmy's tragic death rocked his family, and in particular his mom. She was never the same afterwards. Police investigating the murder learned that the attack on Jimmy wasn't the only fight that night. Another boy named Jimmy Murphy, was seriously injured by unknown assailants, but he survived. The assailants in Jimmy Murphy's attack matched the description of the attackers in Jimmy Townsend's case. The investigation focused on a local street gang whose members ranged from roughly 15 to 19 years old. It's not clear why Jimmy was attacked, but it seemed his murder was gang-related and was possibly race-related. Jimmy was Caucasian, and the group of young men that attacked him were all African-American. The time following Jimmy's murder was one where locals were on edge, fearing retaliation or racial problems. The police did their best to calm tensions and find the people responsible, but they didn't make much headway. Multiple business owners in the area wanted to donate $1,000 each in an effort to create a much larger reward fund that would exceed $50,000. But reportedly, the chief of the police department declined the offer and refused to allow a coordinated larger public fund. There were several smaller rewards, but they didn't lead to any tips. There seemed to be differing opinions on what amount of money it would take to make someone talk, but in the end, no one talked. Maybe they were too afraid to. Jimmy's friends were able to give the police descriptions of the murderers, and the authorities had the names of some suspects. Both witnesses picked the same individual out of a photo lineup. This suspect was also a minor at the time, and ended up hiring an attorney. It's unknown exactly why no charges were ever pursued, but it's been heavily speculated that the suspects were related to members of the Monroe Police Department, and that some kind of corruption allowed Jimmy's killers to walk free, continuing to live their lives as free men. In the decades since Jimmy was killed, various rumors have circulated, and some names of potential suspects were bounced around, but the case remains unsolved to this day. As I mentioned, Jimmy's daughter Kristy was just a month old when Jimmy was killed. Kristy's mother, who was only 16 when she gave birth, was overwhelmed at the thought of trying to raise a baby on her own, and decided the best thing for Kristy would be to put her up for adoption to a family that could take good care of her. Thankfully, Kristy's adoption still allowed her to see Jimmy's family, so they were able to have a part of Jimmy in their lives. As most adopted kids growing up do, Kristy began to ask questions about her birth parents and what happened to them. News that her young father was beaten to death didn't sit well with Kristy. It bothered her that she never got a chance to really know her father, and that multiple people had gotten away with his cold-blooded murder. Since then, it's been Kristy's mission to see a resolution in this case. In a Change.org petition she started to reinvestigate the case, she called Jimmy, quote, the first person to want to protect her for the rest of her life. Even though he was only 13, he was ready to be there for her and protect her, take care of her, and for 4 short weeks he did. But then, like almost every other teenager, he went out for a night of fun at the annual fair. The one difference between Jimmy and the other kids there that night is that he didn't make it home alive. Kristy, as an adult, still lives and works in the area where her father was killed all those years ago. She's a hairdresser and even believes that one of her father's killers was brazen enough to come get a haircut from her, knowing full well that she was the daughter of the young man he killed. That situation was understandably difficult for Kristy. Both of Jimmy's parents have since died without seeing anyone convicted of their son's murder. James Townsend Sr. passed away in 2008, and Gail followed in 2012. Today, all Kristy wants is for her father's case to be reinvestigated with 2024 technology and tactics, fresh eyes, so to speak. Even if charges can't be brought, whether suspects have passed away or nothing can be proven, it's still not too late for answers. It's not too late for Kristy to feel like she took care of her father, who was so ready to take care of her. Kristy has personally offered a reward of at least $1,000 for information that can help secure conviction. If you have any tips regarding Jimmy Townsend's murder, you can call Crime Stoppers of North Delta at 318-388-CASH or the Monroe Police Department at 318-329-2600. I sat down with Kristy to discuss her father's tragic and senseless murder and how it shifted the course of her entire life. That conversation is coming up in just a moment. Hi, Kristy. Thank you for coming on The Murder of My Family to discuss your father, Jimmy's case.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, and thank you for coming on and talking about something, a case that has, I'm sure, greatly affected your life and something you've been trying to seek answers for a long time. Your father's case is still unsolved, and I know that all these years later, you haven't let the case get forgotten. You kept it sort of out there. We're going to talk about your efforts to get justice, but before we get into what happened and what we know, what we don't know, can you tell me a little about your father's life and what he was like, bearing in mind, as we'll get into, that you were so young when he died, he was young when he died, that you didn't really have a chance to know him. Can you sort of tell
I,
us what you've been able to learn about him and sort of get to know him?
okay. Yeah, he was very young. He was 13 years old and with a child. I was 1 month old when he passed away, and that alone is hard. And to ask questions about him and to know about him was very hard too, because I never got to meet him, never got to see him, hold him, or anything like that. But he was a very avid sports player. He dabbled in a little bit of everything. Baseball. I mean, he was so good with baseball, all stars, traveling ball, all of that. He could have went pro. To boxing. The boxing here, we have a boxing center here, and he started picking up boxing, I would say, the last 2 years of his life. And I mean, from the sports player, when I say football, baseball, all the sports that you can think of, riding his bikes, he was he was a kid. He was a kid, just being a kid, doing kid things, and he lost his life for it, at such a young age. The whole me coming into this world, I'm really grateful for, especially knowing how young he was, especially knowing that um, he was gone a month later. So I'm here for a reason, and I was adopted when I was 11 months old. So I really didn't get to ask questions or even know about this really until I was about 16 years old, till I started, getting a little bit more educated on this. But the last 2 years to 4 years, I have been going back and forth with the DA, not the DA, with the police department, trying to get his case back open, and nobody really wanted to help me or to open it back up. So I just felt defeated for so many years before. And I finally found a detective who was like, yeah, I'm gonna look into it. I want to know what happened. I want these people brought to justice as well. And that was probably about a year and a half ago. And I have been meeting with the detective weekly basis, emails, phone calls, going up there and seeing him, letting him know that I'm not going anywhere. And this is not going anywhere, and I want those guys involved brought to justice, some type of justice, even if it's, their names being released, or I just want them brought to justice. I
Yeah.
want them in jail, as they should have been back then in 1985.
Yeah, it's not too much to ask to want justice. I mean, your father, although he was just 13, still old enough to be a father, but he still had basically his entire life ahead of him. And then obviously there's a ripple effect because, that affected your life going forward and, everything else is sort of tied together. I just want to recap. So your birth mother was also young, a little bit older than your father was, but
She was.
um, as far as were they sort of nervous about, you know, it's tough, it's tough raising kids, let alone doing it at such a young age. Were they nervous? Were they overwhelmed? Was this something that they felt they just wouldn't be able to do? Is that why you were adopted in the first place?
Um, well, I was, they were both nervous, of course, as anybody would be at that age. My dad being 13 and my biological mom being 16. They didn't know what to do. My dad was scared. He was scared of that. That probably was the only thing that he was scared of at the time, was becoming a father at 13. He was in junior high. They both were in junior high. I couldn't imagine having a kid at junior high. And like you said, it a ripple effect on everyone involved, and it most definitely had a ripple effect on me, and not only me, but my grandmother, his mom. Um, so bad, so bad. It really took a lot of time from her to heal from that, for sure. And a lot of people, his friends and his family, there were so many people that loved him and that wants justice as well. So he was definitely loved by many. He sure was.
And definitely missed. And as a child growing up in an adopted family, did you know from an early age what exactly had happened and who your father was, or is it something you learned later on about who he was and what happened to him?
It's kind of a funny story, about me finding out how I was adopted. I like I said, I was adopted when I was 11 months old. I did not find out until, I would say, at two different ages. When I was 7, but then I didn't really understand any of that. So it like went in one ear, out the other. My mom told me this story. She went into a room full of all these little girls and she saw me and she wanted me. That was the story that I was fed. Not, that was the story that was given to me when I was younger. And then I got a little bit older and realized that my grandmother was younger than my mom. And I'm like, what's going on here? So I definitely asked more questions then, and that's when everything was told to me about his death and how it happened. And at that point, I could definitely tell you that I I didn't feel like a child anymore. I felt robbed, abandoned. I was embarrassed for a little bit because one of my, I wouldn't even call her a friend. She told me out of spite, out of hatefulness, to embarrass me in front of a bunch of people that I was adopted. And at that time, I thought, it was embarrassing for me. But I did little research and asked the little questions that I could, but I didn't really like talking about it. And then my grandmother, she didn't really like talking about the all the horrible things that happened. She told me all the good things, like about a smile and how much features that we share. And that's what I kind of grew up on until I became more of an adult and more, I would say, my late 20s, 30s. That's when I started going to the police station and asking them to reopen the case. And I never got anywhere. I never got anywhere until about a year and a half ago. And the whole adoption, I was still able to be in my grandmother's life. She was my grandmother, and it was hard because as a child, I remember going to a gravesite and I didn't really understand that that was my dad because I had a dad at home, my adopted dad. And it was very tough. And you know, as a little child, you don't really understand too many things, you know, then. And I just wish that I wouldn't have. I know now that being adopted is not nothing to be embarrassed about at all. It just means that more people love you, and the ones that the one that gave me up for adoption loved me enough, you know, to give me a better home, a better environment, and a safe place, because with her was not it. So I'm very thankful for that, and I support adoption.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot of good adoption stories of people that, sometimes parents just feel that their life will be better for their child if they can put them in a home that's gonna give them all the support they need. So definitely, a good thing there. But, all kids have struggles or questions about who they are, where they come from, and I imagine your situation was just a little bit more tricky than every other kid that you probably knew.
Yes, sir. It was very different. My mother and father that adopted me were 44 and 45 years old. So I had a little bit older mom, and it was different. It was different, challenging, and but I wouldn't change it at all. As far as my adoptive parents, I would change the reason for me being adopted. I believe that if Jimmy wasn't taken so long, my dad, his name's Jimmy, but if he wasn't taken from us so soon, I don't believe that I would have had that adoption life. Um, because his death really took hold of my grandmother, so bad that she had to do a couple years in an institution because of this. And it was her only son, and I was the only granddaughter. And while she was in the institution, I was being adopted, and she had no control, no say, no nothing. So having that little, knowing that things would have been different, you know, if he would have been here, or if she would have been a little bit better, you know, my life could have went three different ways. I see it, you know, I could have had three different roads, but you know, this is the road that I'm on now, and I am on the road for justice for him, because there's just too much things that should have been done back then, and it wasn't.
So let's talk about, as an adult now, you're free to do whatever you want, you know, get involved, go back to the police and say, hey, what happened here all these years ago. When you first decided to go like full speed into this, what did you know to that point? And then what did you learn? Were there any new things that you learned when you talked to the police?
When I first started going to the police, they didn't believe that I was his daughter. I had to pretty much kind of show proof that I was his daughter in order for them to talk to me. And I get it. He was 13. When I was when I was a teenager, they told me that he was beaten to death at our local fair, our Arklamas fair, by a gang, um, over drugs. He literally fought for his life that night. And that was the big part of the only thing that I knew when I was a teenager growing up. Um, I didn't know any of this, you know, what happened prior to it. I didn't happen to know anything as far as after. I just knew he was beat to death by a gang, and the gang's name was the Bird Jones Lane Gang. I knew that, and I just knew I knew I had to do something whenever I got older, look into more research, do more details, and things of that nature. It wasn't really until I lost my memo, because she kept everything. It's not that she didn't like talking about him. It's the fact of how he left us. And it was hard for her. So I didn't bring it up too much to her. But after I lost my memo, I found a box full of her research. and things about my dad's case. And I went over it, and I mean, I was crying over all the things that my mama knew that I didn't know. And if I would have known, I probably would have went a little bit harder on some people. I would have raised more pain back then, like I'm having to do now. But all things happen for a reason, so I'm gonna go with that. Um, as far as the reason why it's taken 38 years for our police department and our justice system to open this case back up.
Yeah, it's got to be tough too for you to sort of go in after the fact and sort of
Yeah.
say, okay, I'm piecing together everything that happened basically when I was a baby, all those years ago. And for the police that are now working the case that weren't working it back then, they sort of got to do the same thing. They've got to go dive into this case sort of with fresh eyes.
Yes.
I guess before we get too far ahead on what's going on now and what's happened since you got involved, can you sort of go back and, as far as you understand it from all the details and everything, can you walk us through what happened at that fair in September 1985?
Yes, I can. I could probably give you a play-by-play. It's played in my head so many times. My dad was enjoying the fair, the carnival rides, the games with his friends, like any other kid would do. I've talked to so many people saying that I saw him that night. We hung out, we rode a ride together. Man, I miss him, and him riding rides. And it's getting to be pretty late that evening. And our fair had this thing called Midnight Madness. And it's where they stay open past 12. And it was like all the kids wanted to be there because it's past their bedtime, it's but my grandmother was coming to pick him up at 12:30. He was supposed to meet her at the gate. And him and his two friends, their names were Shane and Anthony. They went back behind the fair where it was a little bit more darker and secluded by what's like the farmer market now that's butted up to our civic center where our fair was held. And they were smoking a joint. Some kids did it back then, it's 1985. They were smoking a joint, and all of a sudden there's this big old group that started walking towards them. And they walked up to him and said, "Do y'all you want to buy this dime sack?" And they said, "No, man, we're good. See, we have a little." And they were like, "How about we make you buy it?" And that's when my dad said no again. And the way that they were standing, it was my dad on the end and then his two friends to his right. And the gang came up in front of him. And I'm guessing one of the guys, my dad was the biggest of his friends, the tallest, the biggest, had muscles because of boxing and baseball, just all the sports. That guy walked up and punched my dad because my dad smarted off to him. And my dad punched him back. And when that happened, my dad's two friends ran away in one direction, and my dad ran in another direction, and they followed my dad. And my dad was running so fast, he was trying to climb a fence to get away from them. And they pulled him back down, and they literally beat him to death. He was fighting from his life. He was getting hit from all the way around his body, his head, his face, his arms. Everything is getting hit because he is surrounded. He's like inside of this circle. And they are like just back and forth with him. And then, of course, when he drops to the ground, they started kicking him. And so bad to where his kidneys were in pieces by the coroner report. After they realized what they did, they dragged him and put him underneath the vehicle so nobody could find him. And by that time, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
By that time, his friends that ran in the other direction, they did run to get help. At least they did that. By the time two of his other friends go back there looking for him before the police and before the fair workers and all of them got back there, they were looking for him, and it was dark. It was so dark, and just like as one of the guys, one of his best friends, Mark, said, it was an eerie feeling. You felt like they were still watching, that they were out there somewhere, but you couldn't see because it was so dark. And then that's when the cops came up and everything, and they had to do CPR on him, and they rushed him to the hospital. And at that time, he was put on a ventilator to help him breathe. If not, I mean, he would have. They put him on a ventilator so my papa, who was working up north, could get back down here to see him, to say their goodbyes, because there was nothing left of him, even if the fight wasn't as extreme as it was. His death certificate says it's that the victim had been involved in an altercation. It's a homicide, and he had multiple intracranial injuries. And a little further depth into the coroner report is like findings from shaken baby syndrome. And like I said, his kidneys were in pieces. And also, I'm guessing the final blow was when someone stomped on the back of his neck and dislocated his spinal from his cranial. And yeah, after that, there was hours and hours of investigation, talking to witnesses, and I guess starting the to work a murder case, because that's exactly what it turned out to be. And those guys, that gang, they left him for dead. They were looking for him that night. And how I know that is through the research, through my memos research that I found, and things that I have gathered in the past year and a half. And that just doesn't sit well with me, knowing that, and that nothing was done back then.
And what did they have to go on? Obviously there were a couple witnesses or when this happened, his friends. Did they get descriptions? How many people were there, and what was the name of this gang again?
The name of the gang was Bird Jones Lane Gang. There were 7 guys total, and there was 3 known witnesses, and there was also a homeless man that was drunk. He gave his statement, but they couldn't use it because he was belligerent, and they didn't. I don't know why. I don't know why they did some of the things they did back then, but this is what we have to work with now, is what I've been told. The few witnesses that came forward gave descriptive information and names that coincided with my dad's friends' statements. My dad's friends did a lie detector test, and they did a photo lineup, and both boys, because they were boys at the time, separate rooms, they picked out the same guy. And they pulled in several people in. One of the guys actually confessed to it that night. And there's a newspaper clipping saying that a 17-year-old was booked for it, but then later released because he recanted his statement. I don't know exactly why he recanted his statement. All I can go off of is theory. My theory is the lawyer came in and told him that they didn't really have anything, or this and that, or his rights wasn't read to him, or maybe that because he was 17, a parent wasn't involved. But I don't think that was the case, because 17, you can be tried as an adult at 17. And most of the gang members were between 17 to 19 years old. And the reason why two of the witnesses, one of them was a girlfriend for one of the gang members, and the other one that came forward, she basically came forward for the reward. There was a $10,000 reward back then, but then she later said that it was all a lie. But she can't say that it was a lie, because the names and the stories and how she said everything was too descriptive, and the names matched up with what they already had. But what can you do with a witness that says you lied and I don't know anything about it? So you have to let them go. And I guess they at that point they didn't want to pursue this case, because it was one of the biggest cases that they would have to deal with. Maybe didn't want to bring controversial verses with the whole blacks and whites and a fight, and didn't want to cause more, because it was crazy right after that. From what I've heard, obviously I was a baby. Yeah, they brought him in and everything. Even the guy that confessed even listed another guy's name, and that guy was brought in. And yeah, I have a list of names as well, and I have talked them over with my detective, and it's to the point to where, like, I guess now we're about to see what the DA is going to give us. We know what the DA did last time, so we're going to see what this DA does.
That'd be frustrating to have like a list of names and
Yeah.
witnesses, and still not have enough to where an arrest could have been made by this point.
It was enough for an arrest to be made. It was enough for things. But all I keep hearing from my detective is, I don't know why they did the things that they did back then. I don't know why they handled this the way that they did. I see this case very doable back then, is what my detective has told me now. So that makes me question the process, the investigation, everything from the cops coming in, even Metro having to come in because drugs was involved. Something happened, and that the reason why it couldn't be moved forward, because there was enough evidence. We had two witnesses, that seen them. We had two of my dad's friends that seen them. There was enough to put these guys in jail. I mean, we had one that confessed. Like, what? So what happened, back then? But like I said, we have to deal with what we got now. So I'm not, I get louder every day, if that makes any sense, with my dad's case, because I'm not gonna, I've got on a loop. They kind of gave me like a loop of, well, just be patient. At the end of the day, we still want justice. But I still can't trust law enforcement just yet, because of the things that I know from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's the chief of police. It's crazy man. He stopped the reward. Like I said before, there was a reward for $10,000, award for the killers. And it got it got so bad that the chief of police had to stop taking in donations because the money was getting up so high that people were just calling in. And it was so much that the police couldn't handle. And let me go ahead and say that this gang was also a big threat to the Monroe Police Department as well, because they were scared. The Monroe Police Department was scared, especially back then. You know, it was a lot different than now.
Of this gang, you mean?
Yes, of the gang. Yeah, they were. I know. It in one of the newspaper articles, it says that that one person held the key to the murder investigation, and that he hopes that she will call back. She called the Crime Stoppers with some information, which led to and I just found this out last week. It led to a confidential informant bringing her in to talk with the cops, and her giving her statement. To where the next day, literally, these women, the next day, they were like, I lied. That's not true. It didn't happen, because they were scared.
Sure.
They were scared of what could happen to them if they opened their mouth. My dad's friends, like the kids that he went to school with, their parents were so scared for them, thinking that they would try to retaliate and come and, you know, kill their kids like they did my dad. And they all like moved schools, and there's just, it affected so many people, not only me, but so many people, for sure.
Yeah,
And
these kinds of cases are just, they have tentacles that sort of reach out and go in every different direction.
yes, every direction you can think of.
Now, I know it's a challenge because this case is what, I'm not good at math, but 35 years it's coming
30
up on
38 years.
38 years. Okay. So you've got a case that's this old, and obviously witnesses, forget stuff. They can die off. People are afraid to talk. But, one thing it seems like could potentially help this case is physical evidence, maybe even DNA. Do you know if the clothing and stuff was your father was wearing when he was killed? They have that stuff in evidence, because that could have potentially the DNA of some of the people
Yes,
that did this to him.
I agree. When I first reached out to my detective and was in communication, that was the only thing that I cared about. Do we have the evidence? Has it been entered into CODIS? Where's the evidence? Have you seen it? Have you have you seen it with your own eyes, not just hear about it? And at the beginning, that's when I told that we didn't have any evidence, that it was lost in a fire. And you talk about shattered. I was shattered, because I was like, oh my gosh, like we have nothing but to hope that these witnesses will talk again. Months later, I get an email saying that he does in fact have the evidence. And I'm like, wow, well, you didn't, and you did now. I'm glad. I'm thankful. So yes, sir, he does have his clothes and everything that was around him at that time. But being that it happened in two separate locations, what he had on him at the first location wasn't at the second location. And going back to the fire, so supposedly the evidence locker had a fire back in 2012, I believe. But it did not affect any of my dad's evidence. So I am thankful for that. As far as what,
good news.
yes, it is good news. I don't think it's been tested. I don't think it's been entered into CODIS. One, because it's been cold. Two, there hasn't been any approval for money to be spent on this case. Even my detective told me that he was doing it working, looking over and working this case on his own free time, until when I turned in my FOIA. I'm sorry, I never know if I can say that right, but my
FOIA,
my
yeah.
FOIA request. And when I did that, that's when, because I only had, I think he had to give me a response within like 14 days. And when I did that, it took some time, and that's when I got played the loop. I was on a loop. And that's how I can explain that. He They made the case active, which I was very happy about, which the case should have been active, just it's not cold anymore. So I was very happy about that. But in that, it kind of puts my FOIA request on hold, because an active case, I can't get his case. But I actually had to school my detective on the FOIA. Anything after, if a case has not been listed, any suspects has not been listed, or they do not proceed on pressing charges on anyone, the victim's families can present the FOIA request, and if approved, I will get his whole entire case file. And I'm okay with that. I want justice more than anything, but I just don't know about the justice system, if it's going to work for us, if they're going to be for us or against us, because you never know with officials,
Yeah.
So either
Do you,
way will be great.
yeah. And do you know if any of the people that were allegedly part of this gang, are some of them still around, as far as you know?
The crazy thing about that, all the gang members are still alive. Now the cops that worked my dad's case have all died off. The chief of police, back in 1985, Willie Buffington, is still alive. He's about one of the only, well, I say one of the only ones. That's not true. There was another cop that worked my dad's case, that did the crime scene photos and took photos of him and all of that. He's still alive as well. So there's just a handful of people that's still alive, and it has went to another detective. He actually pulled the case out, and he just got buried with other cases, and he couldn't do anything about it. And a case gets on top of another case, and dust starts forming, and that's what happened to my dad's case up until about a year and a half ago.
Yeah. And
But
I think police,
they
as a rule, they sort of look at the freshest, easiest cases to solve, and sort of put the older, tougher ones behind the other ones.
but see
They
that
start
that
piling up.
right, and see, but that's the thing. My detective said this case is very, very doable. So I don't know if it literally, this case was handed to my detective on a silver platter, everything. And that's the crazy thing. These gang members are still alive, and still in my hometown. They walk around. I've scoped them out on Facebook.
Uh, Got to be tough
Yeah,
to know that the people that may be involved in this, some of them are still right there,
very,
just
very
walking
tough.
around out in public, and there's really nothing you can do.
Very tough. I actually had one of the guys come and sit in at my job in my chair. I'm a
Uh,
barber, so I cut hair. And he came in, and I normally don't do ethnic hair, but he was very, very persistent on me cutting his hair, and I immediately knew who he was when he walked in my door, because he was bow-legged. The guy that punched my dad, the first punch, was bow-legged. I immediately knew who he was because I went to the junior highs and high schools to get yearbooks, so I can match what they look like back then and what they look like right now. So yes, that was one of the guys, and that altercation was very, very weird for me because he changed his story 2 times while sitting in my chair and then made it a point to tell me where he was from. And the funny thing about it is the chief of police back in 1985 is from the same town. And if they don't have your ears tingling, I don't know what.
Yeah. Do you think he did? I mean, did he seem to know who you were, or did this just come up as a random conversation and then,
He knew who I was.
Okay.
He knew who I was, and it wasn't until I would say mid haircut that he realized he knew that I knew who he was as well.
Hmm.
And I know a lot of people have asked me, like, how could you have cut his hair and not, and how could you have just cut his hair? And frankly, I don't know how I did it either. One, I'm not a person to inflict pain on anyone. Two, he was or not strong enough. I'm going to say ballsy enough to come to my shop. I had to grow some as well and let him sit in my chair and find out what exactly. But the moment that he left, you talk about, I broke down. I did. I have been somewhat paranoid ever since. Having to look over my shoulders.
Yeah. That's tough. This isn't a case where there's no name, there's no face, there's no leads. I mean, it seems like here you have some potential persons of interest, some suspects, and to see that they're still walking around and eventually sitting in your chair getting a haircut, it's just very frightening.
Yeah, very frightening. But my daddy was a fighter, and I got a lot of his traits, and I am too a fighter. I am fighting for him and for myself because my life has been just like a story, like a bad story type of thing. And I want justice. I want justice so bad, especially for them to think that they could just come wherever they want to. It's not cool. And if they have listed suspects, then they should be named. I feel like everybody should know who they are because so many people, back in 1985, we don't have the technology. They didn't have the technology back then as we do now. Like right now we're on this little call. They had to wait for the news or a newspaper to come out or by word of mouth. A lot of people want justice that thought that they actually got justice back then. The people that was at the fair, seeing it, on the news or something, they all thought, not all of them, but most of them thought that, justice was already brought. But yeah.
Well, let's just hope that, for your sake, that it's not too late and, some physical evidence is there and that clothing, you still have potential witnesses. There's still suspects that are alive. So maybe there can be some resolution in this case and you can get justice for your father after all this time. I'm curious, do you have any websites or social media or anything set up about the case where people can learn more about it or reach out to you if they have any information?
I do. I have a Facebook group. It's a private group. It's called Justice for Jimmy Townsend. And I have change.org. I have a petition as well. I've done a couple interviews with our news station, just trying to get the word out, get everybody knowing about it, and for people to talk, and that's exactly what's needed for this is more people wanting justice, more people for the justice system to know that I can't be fooled because I have all the information like they do, and it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. It was so bad that the Detective Zambi working his case told my mama that he wished he wasn't even on the case. How could a detective tell a grieving mother of her only son something like that? Because this case was so hard and it was just bad for everyone involved back then. And, she didn't take that too well at all.
Yeah, I don't know what parent
Yeah,
would take that. If you're a
exactly.
detective, it's part of the job. You've got to suck it up and
Exactly.
do your job. And if it bothers you, you don't tell the victim's family, hey, I wish I wasn't even on this case. So that, sometimes unfortunately some of the police are not always the most sensitive, or they don't say the right things with families, but that's something that you've got to, you don't expect to hear for sure. But I am curious if one of these people, or more than one, are listening to this somehow and they hear this, what would you want to say to these people that did this after so long?
You can come forward now and help yourself, or you can not come forward, but I'm coming for you. We're coming for you. Justice will be served. It is best for you to just confess. It would be just easier for you to just confess than for us to go through all of the motions. But they're not going to. Y'all are not going to, because y'all are weak individuals. They were weak-minded people that took someone's life that should still be here over something so little, over drugs. And it just doesn't, it's not right. It's not right. You have lived your life. Y'all are 50, almost 60 years old. Some of y'all got grandkids. Some of y'all haven't even, y'all got kids that are the same like y'all. Some of y'all haven't learned y'all's lesson. Some of y'all are still out there doing bad things. Y'all are criminals. Y'all have been criminals, and y'all are now raising criminals. So set an example. Come forward. Do what's right. Change things. If some of them has said that they have a reformed life, life is not reformed. Your life is not, you're not trying to better your life by keeping secrets, by keeping your sins as a secret. Because everybody's about to find out who y'all are. They're gonna find out who y'all are, and it's probably better for y'all to just come forward, please. Please.
I hope you do. It sounds like you're going to stick with it and be a fighter like your father was, and you're just going to hang in there until you get some answers. And I hope you do get those answers, and we'll do our part to spread awareness of the case and put links to your Facebook group and tip line and things like that in the show notes, so that if anybody out there listening does have any information, might be able to help this case, they'll be able to maybe
Yes,
share it and come forward.
Yes, Crime Stoppers is 318-388-CASH. Our Monroe Police Department, Matt Smits is the detective on the case. We also have our DA. Also, I have tomorrow, I go for a meeting with our DA, our ADA, and my detective tomorrow to find out if they're going to start putting pressure on these guys and bringing them in, or if they're not going to do anything. And if they don't do anything, then I'm going to get his case filed, and I'm going to take it to the next person. If they don't, I'm going to take it to the next person. I'm going to go up the ladder, and I'll go as far as to the state capitol if I have to. But it's just, there's no more time for any wrongdoings from law enforcement for this to happen anymore. I believe hopefully we got a good DA and ADA that wants to bring justice as well, and not look at their political statue as it could hurt them, or they just want justice, because I believe that's what kind of happened back then.
Yeah. Well, again, you sound like you're ready for the fight, and
I
I
am.
appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and your father's story, and I wish you luck getting that justice.
Thank you so much for having me on. It truly means a lot.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of The Murder in My Family. I'd like to thank Sonny Landon for writing and research assistance in this episode. We'll be back here soon with an all-new episode of The Murder in My Family, and I hope you'll join me for it. But before you go, remember that every murder victim means something to somebody.